This was not Netanyahu in his role of Saul of Tarsus having a vision on the road to Damascus. This was no transformation. If it had to do with Christianity, this was all Kierkegaard. It was fear and trembling. As a result of Netanyahu's existential encounter with the president, he feared the consequences. And when that fear dissipated, it was Bibi the recidivist. I've had one of the European leaders who's very engaged in this asked me, were there written understandings during this de facto settlement freeze? So I asked my friends in the Mitchell team, and they said, no. Nothing was articulated, nothing was written down. It was all fear of consequences. Let's move on to further conclusions. Basically, Netanyahu has told this administration, you have no leverage over me. Don't try to engage, it won't work. I assume that you will not be having a public altercation with me before the presidential elections next year. I'm banking on it, and I'm being proven right. As a result of that, in many ways, I'm a subcontractor for failures, okay? I've been working on this stuff for 20 years, and if you look at Jerusalem 20 years ago, you look at Jerusalem today, I haven't been a sterling success in stopping bad things from happening. But we have always been able to get engagement. We've always been able to get traction, even when we fail. At this point, during one conversation recently, when I raised an issue of devastating impact with somebody in a senior position in Washington, I was told, Danny, take it to your friend Angela Merkel. Okay? That has never happened before. There is why do I think this goes well beyond settlements, and we'll return to the impact of settlements in a moment. Along with the Shepherd's Hotel, I would consider looking at the United States veto in the UN Security Council last February, and the defunding of UNESCO of having similar impact. They're emblematic of the same trend. I am not an expert on Arab political culture by any means, but I have enough experience working with my Palestinian colleagues in East Jerusalem to hear one message loud and clear coming from Tunis and coming from Damascus and coming from Cairo. Far too long, we, the Palestinian or the Arab publics, have been bought by crumbs off a despot's table, and we have been broken by the mukhabarat. This Arab public will not be bought and will not be broken. We will be listened to, we will be engaged, and we will be met at eye level. That is the language of President Obama's Cairo address. But when the United States vetoes its own language, the own State Department language in a Security Council resolution, it sends a message loud and clear that resonates throughout the region. Israeli public opinion matters. Dade County public opinion matters. Arab public opinion does not. And when the Palestinians go unilateral and receive membership in UNESCO, and UNESCO, in the 70s was a miserable organization. I've been working opposite UNESCO on getting events in Jerusalem under control during the last several years. They are highly professional. They're doing God's work. President Obama says, you have gone unilateral. There will be consequences. And the next day, Netanyahu announces 2,000 additional units in the settlements. No consequences. There is hyper accountability to the Palestinians, hyper-causality for the Palestinians, a suspension of causality, and no accountability for the Israelis, even when vital Israeli interests and vital American interests are involved. Now, there's something uncomfortable when I come to town, that I'm not comfortable with myself. It's a bit pathetic. Here I'm expecting the last great hope, the master of the universe in the United States to solve our problems for us. Sam, we had some frank discussions about that. This is up to Israelis. I feel uncomfortable with that. But for years I've been telling, rather plaintively, my friends in Washington, you're not helping us by letting Israel slide into the abject isolation of South Africa. Well, that's not happening anymore. This country is following Israel into abject isolation. It is engaged in self-marginalizing policies. And I think that this is evident. What we see is not only in Israel-Palestine, but throughout the region is America's impact on the decline. If Israel can cross red lines with impunity and Palestinians are held accountable for virtually everything, the American role in the Middle East as a fair broker is in dire, dire trouble. Where does that leave us now? And I have to go into this. And this is the final message, and this is the message that I will be saying in our conversations here in Washington over the next few days. The calendar in the Middle East was not synced with the calendar of presidential politics in the United States. Mr. President, if you think you are receiving advice, don't go there. Walk away from this. There's only grief in this. You are not going to get peace out of these leaders. Come back in a couple years' time after the elections and getting your ducks in order in a row, whatever. That option, Mr. President, does not exist. Because if you walk away now, given the trajectory of Israeli settlements, by the time you come back, there may well not be anything left to talk about. And I'm not speaking as an ideologue, and I'm not speaking as, I'm not trying to rival Pastor Hagee in apocalyptic visions of Jerusalem. I'm speaking as an amateur but accomplished cartographer. I know the plans. I know where they are. I know where they are in the pipeline. I know how long it will take to implement them. I can give you a very fair appraisal of what the map of Jerusalem will look like a year from now. And I can give you a fair appraisal what it will look like 2 years from now. And 2 years from now, we will have lost, or perhaps 3. We'll have lost the two-state solution because the map will be so balkanized geographically and demographically, it will no longer be able to, one will no longer be able to create that political boundary which is the sine qua non of any political agreement. The tenders that were approved yesterday, Har Homa B and C, expanding the footprint and creating cumulatively a wedge between East Jerusalem and Bethlehem. The 4 Givat Matos plans, 3 of them, have been expedited, thousands of units. If Givat Matos is built, the Geneva Accords are not possible. Without Givat Matos, it is possible. We are not speaking theory. I cannot put this in any starker terms. Getting, at the very least, a de facto settlement freeze is not elective surgery. It is a life-saving procedure for anybody who treats the two-state solution seriously. Now that's the good news. Let's move into other events that are careening out of control. We are witnessing an unprecedented surge in settler-related activity in and around the old city. We've spoken about this in the past. This hasn't been published, but the plans to proceed with the construction of the IDF College on the Mount of Olives are very close. I understand that Jesus, when standing on the Mount of Olives, wept, Dominus flavit. Now we know why. That's exactly what the Middle East needs. The burrowing under Silwan, leading up to the Temple Mount, not breaching the perimeter, but ending up, I was there, in these burrows, burrowing beneath the old city. You have the displacement accelerated in Silwan and in Sheikh Jarrah. You have 8 Palestinian families displaced in Sheikh Jarrah. Well, in a post 9/11 world, what are 8 families? Those 8 families resonate throughout the region. You have 2 refugee societies, a Jewish one and a Palestinian one. The refugee issue is the other radioactive issue of this conflict, along with Jerusalem. By combining the radioactive issue with the radioactive issue of refugees in Jerusalem, we are creating nuclear fusion. It is not possible to engage in permanent status negotiations, which will require the Palestinians to undergo an excruciating waiver of an all but symbolic right of return to Israel, when Israelis are implementing a right of return to Palestinian neighborhoods. We are kicking the hornet's nest of 1948. We are transforming an excruciatingly painful historic event for the Palestinians and transforming it into a contemporary event. And the mass demonstrations on Israel's northern border, with Palestinians standing on our Lebanese border, the Syrian border, holding keys, began in Sheikh Jarrah. What we are witnessing is the transformation of a manageable national political conflict that can be solved by good men and women, craftsmen and women of diplomacy and a political agreement. We are watching that morph today into a completely intractable religious conflict, and we Israelis are not the only ones doing it. Sarah Palin, Mike Huckabee, Pastor Hagee spend more time at the Shepherd Hotel in Beit Orot than they do at Jesus' tomb. It's an Armageddon playground. And believe me, if you follow some of the Islamic movements on Haram al-Sharif, they're participating in the same party. We are losing control. What I am describing here is the following. We have currently 2 states of acute disequilibrium taking place simultaneously. Events are careening out of control on the Israeli-Palestinian track. There is no political process, there is no engagement that is credible enough to generate the energy necessary to resume purposeful negotiations. We are adrift. There are volatile fumes out there, and there are children playing with matches. But there's also another state of disequilibrium, and that is the regional one, which in many senses has nothing to do about Israel-Palestine, but Jerusalem is pivotal to both. And in the absence of purposeful engagement on core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, having these 2 states of disequilibrium exist simultaneously remind me of a problematic spring weather in Iowa where you get tornado after tornado. Disequilibrium, states of imbalance like this, usually arrive at a new equilibrium in one of 2 ways. In a new, purposeful, directed political paradigm, which requires political courage and leadership, or in armed conflict. I do not see purposeful leadership emerging over the next year. which leads me very much to fear that we're just waiting around for the next war, not quite knowing what the pretext will be and where it will happen, but there is no stable state in the region at the moment, and there is no equilibrium. Where does that leave us? We have to locate alternate sources of energy directed, from our perspective, to three goals. One, we must get Jerusalem events under control. We have to take the matches away from the pyromaniacs in and around the old city, and we must get at least a tacit hold on new settlements. And if it's not going to be coming from the White House, as apparently it will not, we have to look for alternatives. Those alternatives are in part the United Nations. Those alternatives are in part the E3. Those alternatives are in part three prominent prime ministers in Europe. None of them are a replacement for American leadership. But at the very best, it is highly unlikely we're going to see robust engagement. We have to keep this pathetic patient on life support until conditions get better. So we have to engage in crisis management. It would be good if we could move the ball down the field a bit by articulating with greater clarity what is involved in the two-state solution. By the way, President Obama went 50%, went to midfield on that by talking about the boundaries of 67. But he didn't talk about one-to-one or equitable land swaps, and certainly didn't mention Jerusalem. It's high time that the international community, including in this town and people of authority in this town, say the two-state solution will take place in Jerusalem or it will not take place at all. And nobody does Israel or anybody else a favor by pretending otherwise. That is delusional. And finally, we desperately have to find a way of resuming some kind of political process. How that's done, I don't know. At best, we can hope to weather these next few months. I am more than willing to entertain any proposals if any of you out there have better ideas than I do. Thank you.